The Battle of Drøbak took place in the northernmost part of the Oslo Fjord on 9 April 1940, on the first day of the German invasion of Norway. It was the start of the war in Western Europe, and an end to the phony war. Oscarsborg fortress near Drøbak engaged a German fleet sailing up the Oslo Fjord with the objective of seizing the Norwegian capital and capturing Håkon VII, the Norwegian king, and his government. At the time of the battle, the aging fortress' main battery of guns was over 40 years old, and the installation had been relegated to training coastal artillery servicemen, leading the Germans to disregard the fortress' defensive value. Furthermore, the most powerful weapon of the fortress was a torpedo battery, which no one but the Norwegian military knew about. In the end, the fortress' armament worked flawlessly. By sinking the lead ship of the German armada headed for Oslo, Oscarsborg fortress saved the Norwegian king and government from being taken captive in the first hours of the invasion. Before the battle, as the political situation was chaotic, the aging 64-year-old commander, Obersperger Eriksson, had not received any clear orders and had received no notice as to whether the approaching warships were German or Allied. He was well aware that Norway was officially neutral, but that the government was inclined to side with the British in case of direct Norwegian involvement in the war. As he was about to give orders to fire, Eriksson said, "Either I will be decorated, or I will be court-martialed." Fire. Apart from the officers and NCOs, almost all soldiers manning the fortress were fresh recruits, having only been conscripted 7 days before, on the 2nd of April. Because of the influx of 450 fresh recruits, the fortress and naval mines were not deployed on the 9th of April. Part of the recruits' training was to lay the mine barrier, a process planned for a few days later. Torpedo Battery. The commander of the Torpedo Battery at Oscarsborg had at the time of the battle been on sick leave since March 1940. Due to this, the retired Commandor Captain Andreas Andersen, who lived in nearby Drøbak, had been assigned as temporary commander for the battery. As an unidentified flotilla started forcing its way past the outer fortifications in the south of the Oslo Fjord, late at night on the 8th of April, Oberst Eriksson called Andersen in and had him come down to the fortress. Commandor Captain Andersen donned his old uniform and was transported by boat over the fjord to the Torpedo Battery. Andersen would show himself worthy of the important task of leading the fortress' most lethal weapon system, having first served at the Torpedo Battery in 1909. He knew the aging weapons intimately. When Andersen had been called back into duty a month previously, he had been a pensioner for 13 years. Having originally retired from his post as commander of the Torpedo Battery in 1927. The battery had 3 torpedo tunnels which could fire 6 torpedoes without reloading, and a total of 9 torpedoes were stored and ready for use. Battle. Main battery rounds. While the main combat station for the main battery and the commander of Oscarsborg fortress was on the island Hauge northwest of South Karlholmen. Due to the special circumstances in 1940, Oberst Eriksson took position in the backup station on the eastern flank of the main battery at South Karlholmen. At 4:21 on the 9th of April, Eriksson gave the main battery guns the order to fire at the lead ship of the unknown flotilla forcing its way towards Oslo. Upon giving the command, Eriksson was questioned. He responded with his now famous response, "Either I will be decorated or I will be court-martialed." Fire. 2 rounds from the 28 cm Krupp guns Moses and Aaron engaged the German cruiser Blücher at 1,800 meters range. The 2 Norwegian guns had been loaded with live, 255 kg high-explosive shells. Firing them, in anger, was a violation of the pre-war Norwegian rules of engagement, which dictated warning shots be fired first. As had been the case at Oslo Fjord fortress further down the fjord, Colonel Eriksson later explained his decision by alluding to the fact that the German naval force already had forced their way past the Oslo fjord fortress forts and had received both warning shots and live rounds from these more outlying coastal fortifications, as the vessels had continued up the fjord toward the capital. Eriksson was of the opinion that he had the right to consider them enemy warships and to engage them as such. The first 28 cm shell hit Blucher right in front of the aft mast, and set the midship area up to the foremast on fire. The second 28 cm round hit the base of the forward 20.3 cm gun turret shortly thereafter, throwing large parts of it into the fjord and igniting further fires on board. There was only time for the main battery to fire these 2 rounds. Due to their slow reload time, with only 30 untrained recruits manning them at the time, only 1 gun crew of actual artillerymen was available, and 2 guns could only be made operational by splitting the real gunners between the 2 guns and using non-combatant privates to assist the gunners. The personnel pressed into service on the main guns included cooks woken up to man the main battery. There was no time to reload. There was not even time to fire the third gun's Josva, which was loaded but unmanned. The reason for the significant effect of the 2 28 cm rounds on Blucher was that the first round penetrated the side of the ship and exploded inside a magazine containing cans of oil, smoke dispensers, incendiary bombs, aircraft bombs for the cruisers Arado R-196 reconnaissance float planes and depth charges. The bulkheads on that deck were blown out and the burning oil developed into an intense fire. The second 28 cm shell also knocked out the electricity central for the ship's main guns, rendering them unable to return fire. Kopar and Husvik batteries while fire raged aboard Blucher. The secondary Norwegian coastal batteries pelted her with guns ranging in caliber from the 2 small 57mm pieces at Husvik, intended to protect the fortress a missing mine barrier, to the 3 15 cm guns of the Kopar battery on the eastern side of the fjord. The larger guns wrought havoc on board Blucher, while the 57mm guns concentrated on the cruiser's superstructure and the anti-aircraft weapons, and were partially successful in suppressing the fire from her light artillery as Blucher slowly sailed past the fortress. The Husvik battery had to be abandoned when Blucher passed in front of it and fired her light AA guns directly down into the positions. Although the main building at the battery caught fire, the Norwegians suffered no casualties. In all, 13 15 cm rounds and around 30 57mm shells hit the German cruiser as it passed the guns of the fortress's secondary batteries. One of the 15 cm rounds from Kopar disabled Blucher's steering gear and forced the cruiser's crew to steer her using the engines and propeller to avoid running aground. Blucher's firefighting system was also knocked out by shell fragments from the 2 Norwegian batteries, making attempts to control the fires aboard the ship and rescue the many wounded much more difficult. Identity of the intruders becomes known as the now crippled Blucher past the fortress guns. A sudden outburst of voices from the burning cruiser could be heard above the battle noises. Norwegian sources state that the crew broke into singing Deutschland, Deutschland über alles. Only at this point did it become clear to the men of the fortress whom they were fighting. Later, at 4:35, Oberst Eriksson received a message from the Norwegian minesweeper HNOMS Otra confirming that the intruding ships were German. The message had been sent to the naval base in Horten at 4:10. But the massive communications problems that severely hampered the efforts of the Norwegian military throughout the Norwegian campaign had prevented it from reaching Oscarsborg in time. The return fire from Blucher was ineffective, with the light artillery mostly pointing too high and the main batteries, 20.3 cm guns, unable to fire due to the damage caused by the second 28 cm round from Oscarsborg's main battery. The shelling lasted only for 5 to 7 minutes. When the guns on both sides silenced with all the passengers still under deck, there was a dead silence on board the whole ship. No movement whatsoever was identified. Commodore Captain Anderson launches the torpedoes after passing the line of fire of the Fortress gun batteries. The cruiser was burning and severely damaged, but her captain still hoped he would be able to save his ship. At this point, however, Blucher entered the sights of Commodore Captain Anderson as she slid past the torpedo battery at a range of only 500 meters. The torpedoes the retired officer was aiming at the cruiser were 40-year-old Whitehead weapons of Austro-Hungarian manufacture. These torpedoes had been practice-launched well over 200 times before, but no one was certain if they would function or not. As Commodore Captain Anderson pushed the firing mechanism, at approximately 4:30, the weapons turned out to work perfectly. First one and then another torpedo raced out of their underwater exit tunnels at 3 meters below the surface toward the burning warship. As Anderson had overestimated the speed of his target slightly, the first torpedo hit near Blucher's forward turret, creating only inconsequential damage. With the second torpedo launched, the aim was corrected and the torpedo struck Blucher amidships, hitting the same general area as the first 28-centimeter shell. This caused catastrophic damage to the cruiser and blew open many of her bulkheads, allowing water to flood her decks while she was burning furiously. The third torpedo launcher was left loaded in case more ships were to follow close behind Blucher. After firing, the 2 other tubes were reloaded and readied for the next target. End of Blucher with all engines knocked out by the second torpedo hit. The cruiser anchored near the Askholmener Islets just north and out of the arc of fire of the fort's guns to try to fight the ferocious fires raging throughout the vessel. Blucher's torpedoes were fired against land to avoid them exploding in the uncontrolled fires aboard. The magazine blast ruptured the bulkheads between the boiler rooms and tore open the cruise's fuel bunkers, igniting further fires. By this point, Blucher was doomed. At 6:22, Blucher sank bow first into the depths of the Oslofjord, first laying over on her port side, then turning upside down and finally succumbing with her screws the last to disappear below the surface. After the ship had disappeared from the surface, large quantities of oil floated up and covered the close to 2,000 sailors and soldiers fighting for their lives in the freezing water. The oil rapidly caught fire, killing further hundreds of Germans. Obergefreiter Gunther Morgalla, who survived the sinking, later told that, swimming toward his shivering crewmates on shore, he had heard someone singing in obstinacy to this fate. The Deutschlandlied followed by Das kann doch keinen Seaman nickt Schutten. In all, some 650 to 800 Germans died, and some 550 of the around 1,400 wet and cold survivors of Blucher were captured by soldiers from Company No. 4 of the Norwegian Royal Guards under the command of Captain A. J.T. Peterson. In total, some 1,200 of the survivors had made it ashore at front near Drøbak, and the guardsmen were supposed to take all these as prisoners, but instead focused on tending for the many wounded and dying. By doing this, the Norwegians neglected their original orders and allowed for the German top officers, chief amongst whom was General Major Erwin Engelbrecht, to slip away to the nearest road and capture a Norwegian truck at gunpoint. The German leading officers reached the Hotel Continental in Oslo only 2 hours later than planned, though without the troops intended to occupy the Norwegian capital. Many of the German wounded were initially taken to Asgarden Summer Hotel in Eskjordstrand for medical care, where Norwegian wounded had already been brought. The hotel was the temporary improvised location for the Royal Norwegian Navy Hospital, which had been evacuated from Horten at midnight on the 8th of April. Remaining ships retreat. By the time Blucher sank, the remaining naval force destined for Oslo had long since turned around and retreated back down the fjord. Seeing the geysers of water from underwater explosions on Blucher, and unaware of the Torpedo Battery, the commander of the heavy cruiser Lutzow assumed the flagship had hit mines, and at 4:40 the decision was made for the flotilla to turn back and land the invasion forces out of range of the Oscarsborg batteries. The planned coup against Oslo to force the surrender of the Norwegian government was replaced by a land advance up the Oslo fjord. As the force made good its escape, the fortress managed to damage Lutzow, the 15 cm guns of the Kopar battery, scoring 3 hits and knocking out the ship's aft 28 cm turret. Kopar kept firing at the retreating ships until they disappeared in the mist at a range of around 3,000 meters. After pulling out of range of the fortress guns, Lutzow employed her remaining turret, Anton, to bombard the defenders from a range of 9 to 10 kilometers down the fjord. During the battle, another burning ship was spotted in the distance from Oscarsborg, leading the Norwegian defenders to believe they had sunk one more German warship in addition to Blucher. For some time after the battle, the belief was that Oscarsborg had sunk the artillery training ship Brummer. The reality, however, was that the burning ship was the 107 long tons Norwegian cargo cutter Sorland that had stumbled into the battle while on her way from Moss to Oslo, with a cargo of paper. As the small ship had mistaken the events as a military exercise, she kept going until fired upon and set ablaze by the German minesweepers R-18 and R-19. Sorland sank with 2 of her 6-man crew near the village of Skiffle in Drøbak, as the first civilian Norwegian ship lost during the invasion. Brummer was indeed lost in connection with the invasion, but only when she was on her way back to Germany on the 14th of April, when she was torpedoed by the Royal Navy submarine HMS Sterlet and sank the next day. Luftwaffe bombing. The fortress was subjected to heavy Luftwaffe bombing later on the same day, to which the fortress could only reply with 2 Bofors 40mm L-60 anti-aircraft guns and 3 Colt M29 7.92mm AA machine guns at Seistan Battery, as well as another 4 Colt M29 7.92mm AA machine guns at Haugja Battery, but again without Norwegian casualties. Initially, 4 machine guns on the roof of the main battery also returned fire, but these had to be abandoned early on in the bombing. One of the 2 40mm anti-aircraft guns became unserviceable after only 22 rounds, the other gun kept firing until 1200, but to little effect. After a break in the attacks from 1200 to 1330, during which time Lutzow bombarded Hovedøya, the Luftwaffe bombers returned at 1330 and soon strafed the remaining Norwegian anti-aircraft guns, forcing the crew to seek shelter in the nearby forest at around 1400. In all, the fortress was subjected to close to 9 hours of air attack, during which time around 500 bombs, ranging from 50 to 200 kilograms in size, were dropped on Oscarsborg. Amongst the bombers that attacked Oscarsborg were 22 long-range Junkers Ju-87R Stuka dive bombers of Sturzkampfgeschwader 1 under the command of Hauptmann Paul Werner Hosel, operating from Kiel-Holtenau Airport in northern Germany. Surrender. Although the German naval attack on Oslo had been thwarted by the actions of Oscarsborg, the city was seized later that day by forces that were airlifted into Fornebu Airport. In light of the capture of the capital, and with news of German landings at the village of Sund south of Drøbak, Colonel Eriksson decided that further fighting without adequate infantry support was in vain. The fortress was surrendered intact on the morning of the 10th of April. Aftermath. In one of the more peculiar battles of the war, a 100-year-old fortification, manned by recruits and pensioners and armed with 40 to 50-year-old weaponry of German and Austro-Hungarian manufacture, had destroyed a ship so new Its crew was still finishing training. Oscarsborg had fulfilled its mission and denied an invader the way to the capital. Even though it and the country ultimately were captured and occupied, the effects of delaying the German advance were immediate and considerable. On board Blucher were troops specially designated to capture the king, the Norwegian cabinet, the Storting and the National Gold Reserve. The delay made it possible for all these to escape from Oslo. Later in the day of the 9th of April, the Storting was able to convene at Elverum and give the cabinet a wide authorization to govern until her Storting could again assemble. Thus, the Norwegian government was able to continue the defense of Norway until it had evacuated to exile in the United Kingdom on the 7th of June, with the Norwegian army laying down their arms on the 10th of June. Bibliography. Berg, Ole F. Isjargarden og Parhavet, Marinenskrig 8. April 1940 to 8. May 1945. Oslo. Marinenskrigs Veteranforening. ISBN 82-993545-2-8. Binder, Frank and Schlunz Hans Hermann. Schwercruiser Blucher, Collars Verlags Gesellschaft MBH, Hamburg 2001. ISBN 3-7822-0784-X. Engerdal, Odd G. Norsk Marine Historisk Atlas 900-2005, Vigmostad and Bjork, Bergen 2006. F. Gjeld, Odd T. Klartilstrid, Kistartilleriet Gjenomar Oslo. Kistartilleriet Officers Forunning. ISBN 82-995208-00. F. Gjeld, Odd T. Kistartilleriet 100R. Sjø Militære Samfund ved Norsk Tidsskrift for TV Zen. Hundvåg 1999. ISBN 82-994738-6-1. Dr. Philos. Grimner, Ole Christian. Oscarsborg Fæstning 9. April 1940. Forsvarets Avdeling, 1990. Hansen, Ole Bo. Sjøkrigens skjebne, Deres egne beretninger, Sjø Militære Samfund ved Forlaget Norsk Tidsskrift for TV Zen. Gårdvik 2005. ISBN 82-92217-22-3. Haug, Andreas. Kampene Einord 1941. Sandefjord. Krigshistorisk Forlag. ISBN 82-993369-0-2. Ribskog, Asbjørn. Kistartilleriet under den anden verdenskrig 1939-1945. Athenaeum Forlages, Vinterbro 1998. Sivertsen, Sven Karl. Sjøforsvaret dag for dag 1814-2000. Sjø Militære Samfund ved Norsk Tidsskrift for TV Zen. Hundvåg 2001. ISBN 82-92217-03-7. Stangeland, Groen Vallebrok, Eva. Norges bedste Varen og Fester, Nas John Ale Festningsvik, Widgestrand Forlagers, Stavanger 2001. ISBN 82-91370-35-4. Tamelender, Michael and Zetterling, Nicholas. 9. April Nazi-Tysklands invasion av Norge, Spartacus Forlagers, Oslo 2001. Wheel, John. Junkers Du 87 Stuckage Schwader 1937-41. Osprey Combat Aircraft 1. Oxford. Osprey Publishing. ISBN 978-1-84176-439-9. Williamson, Gordon. German Heavy Cruisers 1939-45. Osprey Publishing Limited. Oxford 2003. ISBN 1-84176-502-3.